Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Thomas had spent almost the entire week coming up with excuses to avoid that commitment. He said he was tired, that work had been tough, that he didn't really know the people at the party. In truth, he just wanted to stay home. He would much rather have a simple dinner for two or a movie night on the couch. But Melissa insisted. She said it would be quick, that it was important to her, that he was always avoiding social life. He tried to justify himself by saying events like this weren't his thing, but she interpreted it as laziness, selfishness. After a brief silence, she said she'd go alone. That got to him. He didn't want to cause tension over something so small. He took a deep breath and said he'd go with her. They arrived at the already crowded house. Loud music, laughter, raised glasses. It was a group from the gym, fit, tanned, full of energy. Thomas felt out of place, as if he had invaded territory that wasn't his. While Melissa easily mingled, he stood in a corner, observing. He drank some wine to ease the discomfort, forced a few smiles, but still couldn't relax. At one point, someone suggested a game. Truth or Dare. Melissa loved these silly games and always joined enthusiastically. Thomas hesitated, but given everyone's insistence, he ended up participating. The questions started off light. Someone confessed to having had a crush on the gym instructor. Another had to dance in the middle of the room. Laughter, applause. It was clear the mood was loose, light, too intimate for a marriage that had been dragging along. Thomas was already uncomfortable enough when it was Melissa's turn. The question was direct: if you had to trade your partner for someone here, who would it be? She laughed loudly even before answering. She looked around with that glint he knew well, the glint of someone who liked attention. Then she said, her voice dripping with irony, "I guess it would be Nathan. He makes me laugh more than Thomas." The room erupted in laughter. Nathan gave a shy smile but seemed pleased. Thomas laughed out of obligation, swallowing the shame burning inside him. He tried to convince himself it was just a joke. But it wasn't. He saw in her eyes that there was something behind those words. A different glint, a calculated provocation, almost cruel. Thomas didn't say anything. He stayed seated, waiting for the night to pass. It was no longer about the party or the game. It was about what that sentence had exposed. Something had broken. And he knew it. On the way back, Melissa talked as if nothing had happened. She told some joke her friend made, mentioned the song that played, how the wine was good. Thomas just drove. He didn't comment on what he felt. He knew that if he said anything, she'd come back with the same old speech, that he exaggerated, that he was too sensitive, that it was all a joke. So he chose to stay silent. But inside him, something began to scream. In the following days, Thomas became quieter than usual. He woke up earlier, went to bed later. He noticed details. The time she spent on her phone. The muffled laughs while she typed. Nathan's name started showing up too often in conversations. He sent me a funny video. I trained with him today, it was intense. Nathan recommended a book to me. Even the little things seemed connected to him. Thomas didn't want to be paranoid, but everything was right there, in front of his eyes. One night, Melissa forgot her phone on the couch while she went to take a shower. Thomas looked at the device. He felt a chill in his stomach. He thought about respecting her privacy. But he also thought about what was happening to him. The feeling of being pushed out of his own life. He picked up the phone. The password was still the same. When he opened it, he saw recent messages exchanged with Nathan. The words jumped out of the screen like punches. "Too bad you're with him. That day was special for me. I dreamed about you again." And she responded with emojis, with laughter, with hints. Thomas set the phone down slowly, as if holding something contaminated. He sat there, staring at nothing. He didn't cry. He didn't get angry either. It was different. It was as if everything finally made sense. The joke at the party. The hidden laughs. The messages. His absence in that marriage. Melissa was already somewhere else, with another man, with other plans. And he, still trying to piece together something that no longer existed. The next morning, he woke up before her. He prepared coffee. He thought of 1,000 ways to start the conversation. But he didn't need to practice. When she appeared in the kitchen, he simply said, "I want a divorce." Melissa widened her eyes in surprise. She asked where he got that idea from. He said he had read the messages. She said he was crazy. That it was just friendship. That he couldn't throw everything away because of a word game and some messages. Thomas looked at her, calm, firm, and replied, "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just stopping trying to save something only I seem to want to fix." She was left speechless. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just left the kitchen and slammed the bedroom door. He stayed there, the mug of coffee cooling in his hands, feeling an odd relief. It wasn't sadness, or anger. It was as if, for the first time, he had chosen himself. He didn't know what would come next. But he knew he deserved more than crumbs disguised as love. The separation process was less turbulent than Thomas had imagined. There were no long fights, no legal battles. Melissa seemed relieved, almost eager to leave everything behind. Within a few days, she packed her things and left the house they had lived in for nearly 6 years. She took some clothes, personal items, a few photos, and left with the same coldness with which she had laughed at the party. Thomas spent the first few weeks as if living within a pause. Time passed, but he felt stuck in the same minute, trying to understand what had really happened, how someone could be so close and yet so distant for so long. Friends asked how he was doing, and he said he was fine. It was easier than explaining the void he felt when he came home and heard silence filling the rooms. As draining as the marriage had been, Melissa's sudden absence scrambled his senses. He woke up expecting to hear the sound of her toothbrush, the jingle of keys at the door, the smell of the perfume she used before leaving for work. But nothing. Just him and the vivid memory of what was. And what could have been. The absence gradually became a relief. He stopped waiting for messages, stopped checking social media, and began rediscovering the joy of his own company. He cooked for himself. He learned to sleep better. He played old songs that she hated and danced around the living room. He bought books that had been forgotten on his wish list. And he even allowed himself to laugh alone, finding humor in the simple things that once went unnoticed. It was during this process that, unintentionally, he stumbled upon a post. He was browsing through social media, aimlessly, when a photo appeared. Melissa, smiling, holding hands with Nathan. The caption was straightforward, as if they had never needed to hide what they were experiencing. It was as if everything he had suspected had been an old fact, just waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Thomas stared at that image for a few minutes. He didn't feel anger. The feeling that overwhelmed him was different, confirmation. There was proof that he had made the right choice by stepping out of that story. Time passed. News came sporadically. A mutual colleague mentioned that Melissa seemed to be doing well, that she was living with Nathan. Another mentioned they were making plans. Thomas avoided getting into details. He had gotten used to moving forward. Until, during a casual lunch with an old friend, he heard something unexpected. Melissa was pregnant. The fork stopped mid-air. Thomas stared at his plate as if he had forgotten what he was eating. Pregnant? It wasn't surprising, considering how involved she seemed with Nathan. But still, it caught him off guard. The idea of Melissa becoming a mother with another man created a strange conflict within him. He had never dreamed of having children while they were married. Maybe because their relationship didn't leave room for shared dreams. But still, it was news that shook him. The following days were silent. He tried to occupy his mind with work, projects, anything that would distract him from that thought. Until another piece of news arrived, more abrupt than the previous one. Nathan had disappeared. No one knew exactly where he had gone, but the rumor was that he was in Mexico. He had fled. Left Melissa pregnant and vanished off the map. As if nothing had happened. As if the pregnancy was just another problem he preferred to leave behind. Thomas stood frozen in the kitchen, phone in hand, reading the message a mutual friend had sent with this information. He took a deep breath. He thought about Melissa. About how she had laughed, how she had mocked him. About how she traded promises for an adventure. And now she was alone, with a child on the way, abandoned by the man she believed was her new chance. It was ironic. But he didn't laugh. Not even inside. Because as much as life seemed to be giving back in the same measure, it didn't bring satisfaction. It was just sadness disguised as justice. That same week, late at night, while finishing cleaning the kitchen, the phone rang. It was a familiar number. He hesitated for a second before answering. The voice on the other end was shaky. Melissa. She was crying. She apologized, spoke disjointedly. Said she didn't know how everything had spiraled out of control, that she never imagined Nathan would abandon her. She said she was scared, that she felt lost, weak, unsure of what to do. She spoke about the baby. Asked if they could talk. Said she wanted to see him. Said she understood now. Thomas listened to everything without interrupting. The pain in her words was evident. But he had already crossed that desert before. He had crawled through each inch of that dry ground. He had spent sleepless nights trying to understand what she never had the courage to explain. Now, she appeared, seeking relief that he could no longer offer. When her voice stopped, he remained silent for a few seconds. Then he replied, with the firmness of someone who, finally, had learned to put himself first. Melissa, I truly hope you'll be okay. From the bottom of my heart. But I can't be part of this. I already said goodbye to all of this a long time ago. She fell silent. The silence on the other end of the line said a lot. Perhaps she expected a different reaction. Perhaps she still believed he would return. But there was no room for resentment, nor promises. Only the acceptance of what life had become. And that night, when Thomas went to sleep, for the first time in months, he drifted off without needing to dig through the past. Because he had realized his peace was worth more than any reunion. 2 years had passed since that call. Since the trembling voice apologizing and trying, too late, to recover something that had already been destroyed from within. Thomas moved on with his life quietly, without fanfare, without announcing to the world that he was rebuilding himself. It was gradual. He started from within, re-evaluating who he was before Melissa, and how much he had suppressed himself trying to maintain a relationship that only lived on appearances. He began investing in himself. He bought a camera, resumed photography that he had set aside for so many years. Rediscovered the pleasure of walking without hurry, of traveling without explanations, of laughing at jokes that were once censored by her. He allowed himself new hobbies. Learned to cook dishes she said were a waste of time. Wrote short texts that he published anonymously in forums, texts about new beginnings, about pain, about freedom. He started hanging out with colleagues, attending cultural events, exploring neighborhoods he once avoided out of habit. Gradually, his life stopped being an echo of what it used to be. He stopped going in circles and started walking in a straight line, even if he didn't know exactly where he was heading. One Sunday afternoon, Thomas went out to buy some things at the neighborhood market. The place was crowded, as always. Shopping carts bumping, hurried voices, children running between the aisles. And it was between the bread section and the canned goods that he saw her. Melissa. She was thinner. Her hair tied up hastily. She wore a simple shirt, worn-out sneakers. She pushed the cart slowly, and inside was a little girl, about 1.5 years old. Thomas stopped. His body froze for a moment. The girl had light, curious eyes, and something about her vaguely reminded him of Nathan. It was impossible to ignore. He observed for a few seconds. He saw Melissa talk to her daughter, picking up a pack of diapers from the shelf. Her face looked tired, as if she hadn't slept well in a long time. The dark circles under her eyes showed more than the makeup tried to hide. Thomas looked away before she could see him. He left in the opposite direction, quickly but without running. On the way home, the image of her pushing the cart with her daughter followed him like a shadow. He didn't feel pity. Nor happiness. It was a kind of silent unease, as if something inside him had been triggered without warning. When he got home, he sat down and called someone he hadn't spoken to in a while, Melissa's mother. They had always had a good relationship, even after the divorce. When she answered, the voice on the other end carried the weight of concern. Thomas asked directly, without beating around the bush, "Is she okay?" The mother-in-law sighed and said she did her best to help, but Melissa was facing difficulties. Nathan had completely disappeared. No contact, no money sent. The girl was growing up without a father, and Melissa struggled to pay rent, food, and school all at once. The mother-in-law didn't ask for anything, just explained. And perhaps that was what touched Thomas the most. After that call, he spent days thinking. He couldn't forget the image of Melissa's daughter smiling innocently in the cart. She wasn't to blame for anything. She didn't choose to be born from anyone's wrong decision. And Melissa, as much as she had made choices that hurt, she was alone, trying to make it work, bearing the abandonment of another man. It was a cruel story, even for someone who had hurt him so deeply. Thomas didn't want to relive that pain. He didn't want to reconnect. The decision emerged in silence, as almost everything in his life did. He called the ex-mother-in-law again and requested something very clear, that she arrange a way to send help to Melissa, without revealing who was behind it. He wanted Melissa to think it was some organization, an assistance fund, anything, except him. The mother-in-law resisted at first but eventually agreed. She understood it was a gesture of humanity, not a plea for reconciliation. That same week, the first bills started to be paid. The rent cleared, the electricity bill resolved, groceries delivered to the house. Melissa called her mother, emotional, confused about where this help was coming from. Thomas didn't hear the conversation, but the mother-in-law sent a discreet message. She cried. A lot. She said there are still good people in the world. He read that and felt a mix of relief and melancholy. Because he knew she would never discover that kindness, at that moment, came from him. In the following months, he continued sending help regularly. Discreetly, almost invisibly. When Melissa's daughter fell ill, he paid for the medication. When the car she used broke down, he arranged for the repair. Always through the mother-in-law, always maintaining anonymity. It was as if he was taking care from afar, through an invisible thread connecting him to something greater than resentment. This didn't mean he wanted to return or that he still loved her. It was simply a choice. A choice from someone who had suffered and decided not to pass that suffering on. Each gesture didn't erase the past, but it eased its weight. Thomas felt lighter with every act of help sent. As if he was balancing the universe's scales. As if he was returning to life something that was once taken from him. And in this silent process, he kept rebuilding his story. Alone, but whole. Without applause, without recognition, without needing to hear a "thank you." Because he had discovered that there are forms of love that don't ask for anything in return. They only leave deep and silent marks on those who choose to do good, even after being hurt. 6 months had passed since Thomas decided to help Melissa without her knowing. 6 months during which he watched from afar, with mature eyes and a peaceful heart, the fruits of that silent decision. The bills were getting organized. The girl started attending a small daycare in the neighborhood. Melissa's routine seemed less suffocating. And even though she never suspected the origin of the support she received, everything around her showed signs that, somehow, things were falling back into place. Thomas occasionally crossed paths with her, always keeping his distance. Once, she was leaving the pharmacy with her daughter in her arms and a weary smile. Another time, he saw her at the bus stop, distracted, trying to calm the child with an improvised toy. During these moments, he simply observed and continued on his way. There was a strange serenity in seeing that she was trying, that despite the weight she carried, she hadn't given up. And although the past still held pain, he knew she wasn't just the mistake she made. She was a woman with flaws, like anyone else, reaping the consequences of choices that seemed good when made but left scars in the end. One random Saturday, Thomas decided to visit the park near his house, the same one he used to avoid in the early months after the divorce because it was full of memories. He sat on a bench and stayed there, watching the movements around him. Parents chasing their kids, couples arguing about where to have lunch, young people with headphones in their ears, rushing past. It was a world spinning, as always, indifferent to everyone's pain. And it was there, on that late afternoon, that he saw Melissa again. She was pushing a stroller, her daughter sitting inside, now older, kicking her feet and singing something incomprehensible. Melissa walked calmly, with a different look. There was exhaustion, yes. But there was also something that hadn't been seen in a long time, lightness. Thomas lowered his gaze for a second. When he lifted it again, she had already passed. And it was at that moment that he understood, with a clarity he didn't even realize he was seeking, that she hadn't been the reason for his transformation, only the necessary push. What hurt him forced him to rebuild himself. What broke him opened space for him to reconstruct parts of himself that had been abandoned for a long time. For so long, he believed that love was resistance. That loving someone meant enduring, yielding, persisting until the limit. But there, with a calm heart and a past finally at peace, he realized that true love requires reciprocity. More than that, it needs peace. That old idea that love is suffering, that relationships are always sacrifice, no longer made sense. He had learned, in practice, that healthy love is the kind that allows growth, creates space, strengthens instead of draining. When he got home, he passed by the small garden he had been taking care of since the end of the marriage. Each plant had been bought at random moments, some when he felt lonely, others when he needed to believe something new could bloom. And all of them were alive. Some were even flowering. He entered, dropped his keys on the counter, and made coffee. As he drank, he found himself smiling. A smile that didn't come from any specific memory, but from the certainty that, despite everything, he had done the right thing. He hadn't gone back, hadn't reconciled, hadn't created any expectations of return. He simply chose to act with compassion. And now, he no longer needed answers or recognition. That gesture, anonymous and constant, had healed him more than any conversation. Because there was proof that he hadn't become bitter. That he was still capable of looking at someone who hurt him and seeing humanity, pain, weakness, but also strength and effort. As the weeks went by, Thomas began to live even more intentionally. He cut ties that only pulled him backward and drew closer to people who added value to his life. He had new conversations, heard new stories, and in some of them found pieces of himself. He started planning trips he had always postponed. He bought a ticket to the north of the country, something Melissa always said was a waste of time. He spent a few days away from everything, walking, photographing, eating in silence. And there, among unfamiliar faces and new landscapes, he found something precious, tranquility. When he returned, the house felt more like his than ever before. Every object, every corner, every choice reflected who he had become. There was a quiet pride in the details. He was finally living fully. Without masks, without needing to please, without carrying the weight of the past. There was no longer any doubt about his decision. And more importantly, there was no resentment. One random late afternoon, while organizing old boxes, he found a letter he had never sent. It was a draft, written in the days after the separation, in which he tried to explain everything he felt. He read the text to the end, silently. That wasn't him anymore. It was the broken, confused Thomas, trying to understand why everything had fallen apart. He put the paper back without wanting to tear it. It was part of the story. But now, just that, history. That night, he sat in the living room with a new book, unhurried, undistracted. Beside him, a cup of tea. A simple scene but full of meaning. And as he read, he smiled again. A soft smile, from someone who finally understood that sometimes losing what seemed stable is the only way to find yourself. Because loving someone is noble. But learning to truly love yourself, after being discarded, is liberating. And Thomas was free. Free from bitterness. Free from distorted memories. Free from the need to be recognized. Free to move forward, with the tranquil conscience of someone who chose to be better, even when life offered every reason to give up. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.